I then talk about two other types of snacks called a pre-performance snack and a primer. And so a pre-performance snack would be one that's 1 to 2 hours away from training. This is where things start to change. So coming back to that idea of what we need before we perform also needs to factor in A, what we need for the session, but B, how it's going to digest. So ideally here it's carbs and a little bit of color. And the good thing is often they can be the same thing, like i.e. a banana. If it's only an hour before, you may only have the muesli bar or the banana. But if it's 2 hours before and you can tolerate it, it might be something a little bit more substantial. So the yogurt and the fruit, or maybe it's like some toast with some toppings, like some cottage cheese and tomato or ricotta and berries or something like that.
Hey, welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Tan. And if you're joining me for the very first time, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And if you are back, thank you. I appreciate you and all your support. This show is all about human performance. I created this show because I really want to help you be able to perform at your best, whatever that looks like, for wherever that is for you. I chat with athletes, health experts, doctors, scientists, and so many more on the best tips, tools, and strategies to help you perform at your best and discover your extraordinary potential. Because I truly believe we all have an untapped potential within us. And whether we are afraid to tap into that, or we don't know how to tap into that, or we don't even know that it's there, I want to make sure that you are able to discover that, uncover that, work with that, and perform at your best and be the most extraordinary person that you are. Before we get into the show, I wanted to tell you about my last week, but it's actually been, I reckon, around 4 weeks where I've just felt so incredibly low energy. My brain feels like it's not working whatsoever. I try and exercise and cannot, I'll be doing my hair in the morning and, be out of breath. It's been the most crazy experience, and there's no COVID. I've tested a couple of rat tests and nothing like that. But it's just, I wanted to share this because firstly, I made some tweaks to my nutrition, and obviously we're talking about nutrition today. So I thought, it kind of marries quite well today, but also the fact that I guess I wanted to share the mindset around when you're feeling really low and not able to do the things that you normally do. And I would normally be really hard on myself, and the fact that I can't go to the gym and, I guess train the way I want to be training, or train the way I enjoy training. When you're doing the things that bring you joy, don't bring you joy in that moment because of how you feel. It's kind of a head screw, to be honest. And so instead of trying to push through that this year, or maybe the last 12 months at least, I've really tried to change my thought process and really listen to my body, what it's telling me. But not only that, like all the other external signals I get as well. And you could say, I call it, signs from the universe. If you're not woo-woo like me, then disregard that. But I truly believe, things are put in front of us for a reason. And, if it's a lesson on how to deal with something, or if it's a lesson that you're yet to grasp because something keeps happening over and over again, then it's probably something that you need to work on. And so for me, my diet and my training and my thought process around all of that is sometimes not as, I guess you could say, healthy as I believe it could be, or I believe should be for me. And I say should because I've been in a position where I've, done certain things and I've felt really amazing. But then, these sort of habits come back into play because I get, whether it's complacent, a little bit lazy. And so, I fall back into this routine that's not so healthy. And so I feel like, when that happens, these things start to come into play. And so anyway, I wasn't feeling great for the last 4 weeks. So I made changes. And the first one was a mindset shift. And that was, I decided I wouldn't feel guilty for not training. So within this period, I didn't train for 3 weeks at all. The only thing I would do is go for walks in the morning. And that was when I was feeling up to it. So I let myself off the hook for that. I went on daily walks or thereabouts when I could. The other thing was I drank a lot of water, or much more water than I normally would. And then my diet. Now, for anyone who knows me, knows that I love a mocha in the morning. I don't eat breakfast until around not midday, sorry, that's lunch, until around mid-morning, so around 10. And then I'll have lunch and so on and so forth. And generally the breakfast brunch is kind of filled with whether it's breads, croissants, the things that I've recently found aren't that great for me personally in the morning. And so I've changed it up, and I've changed it to, overnight oats with lots of different berries, raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, nuts and honey. And I've been having a fresh juice made by moi, carrot, apple and ginger, and, having lunches that are more, I guess, fiber dense and filled with fresh veggies. So, I'll have like a quinoa and vegetable soup. And so I've changed my diet completely. And just by doing that, the difference it has made in my energy levels has been huge. Now, I'm not going to say that it healed me or anything like that, but it was a good 4-week period where I was feeling off. And so having made those small changes made a difference to the way I felt and the way I showed up, because at one stage I felt like I couldn't even sit down and do my work. And when you want to work and your brain just doesn't work, it's really hard. So at least by making those changes, I was then able to at least sit down and do some work and go for walks and feel more productive. Now, I would just want to point out that if you're not feeling great, you don't have to be productive. That's not the message that I'm trying to push. But for me in that moment, I knew I was well enough to do stuff. I just couldn't function in the way that I wanted to. So certainly if I was feeling really off, then I would not be doing anything, literally just be sitting on the couch, maybe watching Netflix. So yeah, I changed my diet and it's been really great ever since. I'm actually really proud of myself. And there's still some things I'm going to tweak. So I'll take you along for the ride when that comes along. But until then, let's dive into this episode, because this was, it gave me also more tips or more strategies to, incorporate into my routine as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. I chat with the extraordinary Jess Spendlove today. Jess is a performance dietitian who has spent the last decade working with the most professional sporting codes in the country across AFL, NRL, netball, basketball, rugby, and soccer, totaling more than 30 seasons of experience. While she loved her time in professional sport and managed to cram a career's worth of experience into a decade, Jess is now focused on working in the private sector, spreading the message of the power of performance nutrition and how it can elevate performance in every aspect of your life. Jess currently works with professional athletes and business leaders in her premium coaching programs and presents to large corporations, the Australian Defence Force School of Operations, and many schools on a variety of well-being and performance topics, and also has an expanding range of digital products focused on spreading the message of performance nutrition, including her signature course, Eat Like the Elite. Jess helps athletes and business leaders confidently leverage the power of nutrition to maximize their cognitive and physical performance while working within their current lifestyle. And that is so key to adopting these long-lasting, sustainable changes, is making it, adopting it to your lifestyle and what you're doing. And I find that so many of the past nutrition, I guess, guidelines or diets that I've tried in the past, whilst I've had benefit like within the period of me doing it, they were never long term. They were never sustainable. I didn't feel like it was easy enough to incorporate within my lifestyle. So Jess is incredible, the way she gives such simple and applicable tips and strategies that you can apply straight away. And that's what I love about her and her work. So I know you're going to enjoy this episode because it really gives you insight into how to manage your nutrition for performance, but also to feel good and to manage things like snacking and or like midnight snacking if you're waking up hungry. This was never a thing until recently, and I remember waking up feeling so hungry, and I'm like, oh God, that's weird. I'll just have some water. And I woke up like 3 times. I'm like, okay, I need more than water. And so understanding why that occurs and how you can mitigate that is super important, especially if you are training and trying to keep up up to your best. I mean, sleep is hugely important in recovery. So she's incredible. We dive deep into all of that today. So without further ado, enjoy this episode on performance nutrition with Jess Spendlove. Jess, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jackie. I'm so excited to be here. It's been a long time in the making, which is my fault, but we're here.
We are here. Exactly. That's the main thing. We're talking all things sports nutrition today, which I'm pumped about. And, you know, no better person to talk to than yourself. You have an impressive background and extensive experience working with elite teams, AFL, NRL, netball, basketball, the list goes on. So I'm pumped to have you on the show. I thought we'd start with the super basics, because even, you know, we're human, so we can even get the basics wrong. So let's start with the basics of nutrition and its role in our health, fitness, and performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think we never want to assume. I love to start at the start. And the way I think people need to think about food is it is this behavior that we have to do every single day. There's not too many behaviors we have to do every single day. So the power of it when we dial into it is incredibly important. You know, nutrition is the science of food and all of the nutrients that we eat to fuel our body. We've got macronutrients and micronutrients. So there's 4 macronutrients. Macro means large, and that simply means these nutrients give us energy. So they have a calorie or a kilojoule value depending on which speaks to you. And our 4 are carbohydrates, protein, fats, and also alcohol. That's why there's 4. And then we've got our micronutrients, which are like our vitamins, our minerals, our antioxidants. Ooh. Our minerals and antioxidants, which don't have a calorie or an energy or a kilojoule value, but they perform functions in our body. And aside from them performing functions in our body, they are also often cofactors to a lot of our macronutrients. So our vitamins and minerals are things like calcium, magnesium, the B vitamins, vitamin C, etc. So people are probably pretty familiar with those. And the two work together in harmony, but also independently to have all of their different roles. And at the end of the day, our nutrition is key to how we feel, perform, and how we function. It impacts every single cell, every single organ, every single metabolic function. You know, when we think about even like our brain and the fact that it needs 20% of our total energy to run our entire body, it's incredibly important. And then when we think about our hydration, which the two are very, interconnected. When we talk about nutrition, we often talk about the two. Our brain is more than 70%, it's about 73% water. So I think it's important we also call out the hydration piece of nutrition as well. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's the basics for people to kind of start with.
I can't help but my brain goes, alcohol? Was that part of the macro?
Yeah, so it's a macronutrient because ethanol has an energy value. So, I include it so people are aware, because it's not essential as in protein, carbs, and fats have an essential role in our body. But it's also understanding that ethanol has calories. So when we drink it, we are providing our body with that energy source. And the other piece of that is when we are drinking alcohol, our body prioritizes metabolizing that because it wants to clear that from our system. And that really slows down or halts the metabolism of other foods, which we then actually start to store. So I think that's a really important thing to call out in terms of it is a macronutrient, and it also impacts how we metabolize other nutrients when we are consuming it.
Yeah, that's super important and something. I mean, I've always understood that the body, wants to get rid of it basically as soon as it comes in. But yeah, you kind of forget the basics of, well, that stops the body's other processes, kind of, in a sense.
Exactly. And it's a limiting factor in that we can only metabolize so much ethanol per hour. So this is how we get our the driving, the ranges and the recommendations between like what is a standard drink and what we're allowed to kind of like consume and also drive. And that is based off how much we can metabolize, like essentially the liver can clear from our body within that time. So yeah, we do have a limiting factor, and it is just a time process depending on how much is being consumed. So certainly not going and saying it's a key important one we all need to be consuming, but I think important to understand that it sits there, because a lot of people are like, what, it is, huh? And it's like, well, yeah, technically, because it has an energy value, so it is classified as a macronutrient.
Super interesting. I'd love to know then, when, you know, under fueling. I mean, that's one thing for me. I'd have to say is when I've been in my training, or especially when I've upped my training, I'm doing more, but actually nothing else changes. So I've increased my training, and my diet kind of just stays the same. And I guess, the energy either dips, or I just find that I'm not benefiting from the training, or I just don't feel like I'm getting stronger. There's this plateau, and I'm not sure why. So is that under fueling, and how do we kind of mitigate that? And are there any other symptoms to know whether we are under fueling?
Yeah, underfueling is a huge issue that I see a lot of active people facing, and that's athletes at the top level all the way down just to our everyday humans like myself that are just active. And you've hit the nail on the head. I see this a lot, people training for something or dialing up their training program or phase, and the nutrition stays the same every single day. We're creatures of habit, and it's
Yeah.
kind of like it's an afterthought. And to the point of me saying nutrition is such a powerful behavior, we do it every day, it's often just this autopilot thing that we do. We set and forget, and that's it. So I hope some of the takeaways from today are just putting things on people's radars. But it is difficult in terms of approximating, okay, well, I'm changing my training routine to this, therefore I need to do this. Working with someone like in a one-on-one sense can obviously help with that. But, as just a really practical way of going about things, I talk to a lot of people about plate ratios because, the other complexity is just because we're training more or training more intense doesn't mean we're driven to eat more. In fact, like our body actually kind of tells us the opposite pre and post. Before, we might be concerned about eating and how that's going to sit on our stomach. So we might actually limit. And then post, we've pushed ourselves really difficult. We produce lactic acid. We're not hungry. We feel maybe a bit sick and we actually don't want to eat. So the theory of I'm training more, I need to eat more in particular before and after training, a lot of people get. But the practical and the tactical, like I'm actually doing that, is very different. So hopefully we can give people some strategies here. First of all is awareness. And second of all is like, how can we address this? One thing I also like to talk about with nutrition is the same as we train for running or triathlon or swimming or netball or whatever our sport is, nutrition is the same. So I really want people to think about like they're putting themselves in nutrition training. And this is often about training your gut and your brain to communicate with each other on what they need. But it's also about training yourself to tolerate more food at the right time and being comfortable with it and having the knowledge of knowing, because, one common thing I see is people eating the wrong thing before they exercise. Within 30 to 60 minutes before any like team sport, endurance-based, CrossFit-based session, we really only want to be consuming carbohydrates. And that's pretty low fiber carbohydrates because our body can only process that. Like if we're eating a high protein, bit of healthy fats right before we exercise, that's simply going to be sitting in our stomach. It's not going to be digested. So, having that kind of awareness. But I guess to answer the question on things to look out for, like some of the first indicators are some of the things you've touched on: plateau in performance, decreased energy levels or bigger dips in energy, more fatigue across the day or in training, interrupted sleep, so poor sleep quality or insomnia. They're probably the things that pop up more short term. Maybe a little bit more irritable mood, a little bit snappy, snappy toms, and then some, and then some of the other things we might start to see is like bad skin, hair loss. We might get sick more often, so particularly colds and flus, like we call these upper respiratory tract infections, or even gastro. They're probably the ones to look out for. But then even some more significant ones can be more risk of injury. In particular bone injuries, so bone stress or fractures even. And then hormonal imbalances, which short term, may not present themselves much, but longer term it's like irregular period or obviously like stopping of menstruation. So that's the kind of continuum. But I think the more we know those little red flags to look out for, the easier it is to kind of go, oh yeah, need to maybe dial up the carbs or add an extra snack or work on something like that.
That's right. And like you said, that first piece of awareness, once you know that, those red flags are coming up for you, it's necessary to make that change quite quickly because, those long-term effects, once you're getting there, I mean, it's much harder to come back from. So you really want to nip that in the bud. Can we talk about cravings? Because I feel like, I would say that I crave chocolate. I don't know if that's just my brain and an addiction thing that I need to work out, but like cravings, what can this tell about, our nutrition and fueling ourselves?
Yeah, cravings. I love talking about cravings because I have so many active people and athletes say, Jess, I'm a sweet tooth. I just crave insert said sweet food. And exactly. I just say, I don't believe there's such a thing as I get people can have a preference for sweet over savory. But if you're sitting there telling me every single day or most days I crave sweet foods, that is number one, your brain sitting there telling you I am not getting enough food, total food, or I'm not getting enough food at the right times. And some of the most common things I see are like the pre and post training. but also just the distribution of protein across the day. That is such a powerful strategy for performance, for body composition, for recovery, but also appetite control. And, I never have someone say, Jess, I'm craving chocolate for breakfast. I hear I'm I'm craving chocolate in the afternoon, around dinner, or after dinner.
Yes.
And that's a byproduct of what has or hasn't happened at the front end of the day, or potentially the day before. So thinking about that training load, training schedule, it's kind of often when we have a bit more space in our day, or just when those little signs which we may not have acknowledged or been aware of, they become really increasingly obvious when your brain is like, give me the sugar, give me the things now, because I need the food, I need a boost, and that's going to be the fastest way for you to give that to me.
Yeah. So setting yourself up in the first part of the day can really help with that evening craving.
Yeah, 100%. The distribution across the day, but in particular that breakfast and snacks from a protein perspective, and potentially a fiber and a hydration, they're the three big kind of players that I see contributing to people with cravings.
Okay. Well, then let's go to midnight snacking then, because I mean, we all know that sleep is a huge part of our recovery process. And then if we're waking up hungry, I mean, that's going to not only impact our sleep, but also obviously we're not getting something. So what's midnight snacking about? How do we manage that?
Yeah, that's one of two things, probably a combination of both. It's not getting enough total energy, but it's definitely not getting enough of that protein distribution again. So, when I talk about protein distribution, people can go with a few different options. So there's either just a nice rule of thumb, which is 20 to 40 grams at meals and snacks, like within that range. If you want to get a bit more specific for yourself, we're generally looking at 0.3 to 0.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass per meal and snack. And again, I have never had anyone walk into my office across the thousands and thousands of people that I've worked with that is nailing their protein at breakfast and snacks. It's just not something we organically do. It's quite difficult unless you're dialed in and really strategic with it. And then on top of that, if you have never been great at breakfast, or the other thing I think is people have never been educated on how to snack. We think a snack is like a muesli bar or a piece of fruit, or we shouldn't snack, where it's like, no, it's actually a super important strategy for an active person to fuel, recover, add in some nutrition, and balance out their day. So yeah, it's that will really help with that midnight snacks and cravings, because if you're waking up hungry, that is a really big red flag. You are not eating enough, and you're not eating enough protein.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned like basically everything that I do right there. And I think, beginning with that mindset and changing that mindset around firstly the snacking is a huge one, especially for me. And I can imagine it would be for a lot of people, is reframing what a snack is and how to do that. But also eating enough. Now, I I kind of call myself a bit of a lazy eater, in the sense that whilst I know I need 40, you said 40 grams of protein, is that right? Or thereabouts? 20 to 40, yeah, depending on who you are and what you're doing in your circumstances. What does that actually look like? Because I'm not one to pick up labels, measure, weigh anything. Hmm. Yeah.
Day might be like a third, a third, a third. And then a really high day, which might be like pre event or pre like your most intense session of the week, it might be half a plate of carbs, a quarter colors, and a quarter protein. So you'll notice across those examples, the protein was the most consistent one. So it kind of ranged between about a quarter and a third. So that's the first place to start, particularly lunches and dinners. So when I talk about protein, there's three main groups. There's like your animal-based options, which is anything directly from an animal, meat, chicken, fish, eggs, etc. Then there's dairy, which is like obviously derived from an animal products, so yogurt, cheese, milk. And then there's your plant-based options. So your tofu, your soy-based products, lentils and legumes are some of the best options there. In terms of like meat or chicken or fish or that type of thing, it's quite a small amount to get. So 100 grams of raw weight protein is about raw weight like fish, chicken, beef, etc., is about 30 grams of protein. So it's quite easy at dinner and most people for lunch to get that. A tin of tuna, which is 90, is about 18 grams. 2 eggs are about 12 to 14 grams, depending on the size and everything. So we can kind of have these examples. And maybe one thing I should provide you with is I have a few like documents where you can get like protein ready reckoners, so people can just have that available to them. But then there's things like, your Greek yogurts. Like I am a big advocate of those types of options. They just give people like a really blank canvas, which they can do a lot to as well. Because protein, people think beef, chicken, fish. And what I'm certainly not saying is like eat that for breakfast. If you enjoy that, do that. But just understand that, at dinner you might be reducing the amount you're having and redistributing it to breakfast. But it might be more like adding the Greek yogurt or adding some protein powder to your shake, or having some eggs on your avocado on toast, or some smoked salmon, or maybe it's a plant-based smoothie with some soy milk and some soy yogurt or something like that.
Okay, so 2 things come out of that for me. Firstly, for a vegetarian like myself, having it takes a lot. So the legumes, whether it's beans or those lentils, you have to kind of consume more of that than say someone who eats meat and has their little slab of meat that provides them, with 20 to 30 grams then and there. So what would you say for the vegetarians or the vegans out there that I guess have to consume more, and so could fill up a whole lot more, and how they could, manage that then in a meal and then throughout the day?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's like a really important thing to call out, because I'm like agenda free on how people want to eat. Like it's such a you do you. My mission is that these are the principles that apply to everyone universally for performance, and then how do we work through that? But yeah, you've called out something really important, and as I see people moving more to plant-based, whether it's exclusively or predominantly or vegetarian, there's like still a lot more options, particularly if people are consuming like milk, yogurt and cheese and eggs. They're quite protein rich examples, but yeah, you're right. If someone's predominantly relying on lentils and legumes, which are not just a good source of protein, but also fiber, that can really fill you up. So the first thing is like education and awareness. I'm probably always going to come back to that. The second, it's so important. And it's also like looking at your own, how you eat, what you like to eat, and just thinking, how can I optimize? So I'm also very pro, I'm careful on how I word this, but for people who are struggling to hit their protein, I'm often quite pro them using a high quality plant-based protein powder, and that can be whether to support or whether to support or optimize. So if you're an overnight oats for breakfast person, and like you could switch to soy milk if you're using another type of plant-based milk, and you could add some soy yogurt maybe rather than coconut yogurt. Like they're a lot higher from a protein perspective naturally. Or you could just, if you're an almond milk coconut yogurt kind of gal, boost it up with some plant protein to like a pea or a mixed blend, to top that up.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm so glad that you said that, because that's one thing that, yeah, that I find difficult is that protein intake. And so I do feel like, at the end of the day, I have to get it from the powders, protein powders. So that's nice to know. It's a go-to, at least. So I really want to get back to that sleeping piece, because I think that's really important. And, you know, nutrition based, looking at nutrition, or our food, our dinners, our snacks before sleep, is there kind of, I know that you hear now sleep hygiene is something that gets thrown around a lot. Is nutrition a part of that? And if so, how, when, and what?
Totally. I feel like this could be an episode in itself. It's kind of my two loves combined. It's also two of the behaviors we have to do every single day combined. But
Exactly.
it's it's also like I feel like I'm a foodie and a sleep enthusiast who works as a dietitian. The two are inextricably linked. It is a cyclical relationship. Both positively and negatively have the capacity to influence each other. So sleep hygiene is a really big focus, sleep routines, like sleep optimization, all of that. Nutrition definitely plays a role. So good sleep hygiene, and I do caveat because I know there'll be people who work late or train late, and then that's like kind of separate set of rules there. But where possible, it's your last proper meal, like ideally 3, but 2 to 3 hours before. And then with that, what I do tell my like highly active people or people with a high energy budget or just people needing it, if you are needing a snack pre-bed, coming back to our friend's protein, is preferably like a high protein, high tryptophan rich snack. So nuts or like a dairy based option or a plant based is really great to be supportive of sleep because they're quite high in tryptophan. I think it's also understanding the things that impact. I'm sure most people have heard alcohol and caffeine and understand that neither are supportive of like a good night's sleep, whether that's getting to sleep or staying asleep or just the depth of sleep. But then the other thing is also like coming back to this whole like regularly pulsing your intake of meals across the day. Aside from that supporting your energy and your mental focus, that is also very supportive of a good night's sleep, because if we're doing that, we don't get the cravings at night. So we're not eating the high sugary or high fatty foods, which can impact the sleep, as well as, the common thing I see is the dinner being a lot bigger than the breakfast and the lunch. So that also feeds into that sleep hygiene piece. And if we train late and work late and our big meal is late and like it all just is this knock-on domino effect. So what I like to talk about is more how do we push those dominoes the other way, because the great thing is when we start to get one in check, the other falls in check pretty quickly as well. And when sleep and nutrition are more in check, what do we know? Our performance is elevated. So pick one, focus on one, but you'll find that it also has that positive knock-on effect to the other.
Beautiful. And you mentioned tryptophan, and I just would love for you to break that down for people who've never heard of that before.
Yeah, sorry. It's an amino acid. So it's one of the 20 amino acids, and it's in like a range of protein foods, animal and plant-based. So lentils and legumes, again, really great source. Chickpeas. Almonds are also a good source, and then like turkey and dairy-based milks, but also soy milk as well. So it's purely an amino acid, and it has a key role in melatonin production, so that getting to sleep. Yeah.
Oh, big one. Okay. I just want to go back to snacks for a second. And I really want to understand snacking better, in the sense of, do we snack regularly throughout the day, or is it like we have a breakfast, we have a mid-morning snack, we have lunch, we have an afternoon snack? Like, is it spaced out like that, or is it like when your body feels like it needs something, you snack?
Yeah. There's a few, I guess, guidelines. I love a guideline or a principle because it's not, me telling someone every single person listening to this has to have 2 snacks a day. It's looking at your life, your training, and listening to your body. But there are some things I will say. So the first thing is looking at meals and snacks. Well, meals, I talk about something called all the elements, which is like my way of talking about macros and micros, but I just think in a practical way. So it's telling people a meal should have protein, carbs, colors in those kind of different ratios I spoke about before, and a little bit of healthy fats to flavor it and tie it all together. When we look at snacks, and I'll talk about 3 different types, there's one I call the everyday snack. And for me, that's something that's 2 or more hours away from a training session. So depending on who you are and when you train, that's quite helpful to know, but it's 2 hours away from. So it can be like after, but if in terms of before, it's more than 2 hours before. So like if you train in the morning and you need a mid-morning snack, that's probably your example of an everyday snack. And then if you're not training in the afternoon, that's maybe also where your everyday snack might live. That should also follow the similar principles: protein, carbs, and colors, at least those 3. And if you can get some healthy fats in there as well, added bonus. So that might just be in terms of food, like Greek yogurt or soy yogurt, a muesli, some berries with some nut butter, ticking all the boxes. I then talk about 2 other types of snacks called a pre-performance snack and a primer. And so a pre-performance snack would be one that's 1 to 2 hours away from training. So that might be for my people that train in the afternoon, 5 o'clock after work or something. Maybe lunch is at 1. You might have a snack between 3 and 4, and that's a pre-performance snack. This is where things start to change. So coming back to that idea of what we need before we perform also needs to factor in A, what we need for the session, but B, how it's going to digest. So ideally here it's carbs and a little bit of color. And the good thing is often they can be the same thing, like i.e. a banana. And it might have a little bit of protein. So depending on the time, like if it's only an hour before, you may only have the muesli bar or the banana. But if it's 2 hours before and you can tolerate it, it might be something a little bit more substantial. So the yogurt and the fruit, or maybe it's like some toast with some toppings, like some cottage cheese and tomato, or ricotta and berries or something like that. And then a thing called a primer is something you would consume within 60 minutes before you train. So if you train early in the morning, you don't have to get up at 1 a.m. and have like a pre-performance snack and then a primer. But if you're training for more than, say, 60, 75, 90 minutes at a high intensity and there's a performance benefit, you ideally would have a primer before you go. And that might just be fruit or dried fruit or toast with jam, something really quite simple, purely carbs. The fiber content is based on what you can tolerate, but if you're not having anything, start with low fiber. So yeah, everyday snack, pre-performance snack, and a primer, and knowing when to use them is really looking at your day and your schedule. And the last thing I guess I just want to say on it is, I know there's this whole like intuitive eating movement, and that's like great, but the people I work with need structure and guidance and aren't getting it right because of how they're training. So I find people who are active need to eat every 3 to 4 hours. Professional athletes, some of them are every 2, but the average active person, it's 3 to 4. So I think if we look at our days, the biggest gap for most people is lunch to dinner. So we need probably at least something there. But I do like to give you the 3 options so you can look at your days, you know what you need, and it's a bit of Tetris. It's kind of like moving things around and shuffling them. And that structure and knowing the what and the why and what that looks like is so powerful.
It really is. And I want to dive deeper into fueling. But before we do, you said the average active person. I'd love for you to break down what that actually means, because I've had clients in the past who run almost every day and still don't deem themselves as active or as an athlete. And I'm just, it's quite mind-boggling to me that they think that. So can you give us an understanding of what active means?
Yeah, for me, it's like if you move every day, you're an average active person. And I think if you're training for something, particularly if you're training for an event like a marathon, a triathlon, an Ironman, a trail run, like you're an athlete. So
Exactly.
it's not you're a professional. Athlete is a mindset. It's like the lifestyle you lead and how you want to live your life. And I saw this post from Mark Boris. I'm a bit obsessed with him at the moment. And he had his like 3 tips for preventing burnout. And one of the, like his first tip was like treat yourself like an athlete. And that was speaking to
Yes.
anyone and about the need for like movement, rest, good quality diet, and good sleep. And, I like to think of myself as I'm not even really training for anything at the moment. I'm just moving, but I still approach myself like a high performing athlete. Like high performing people are high performing athletes. You just maybe don't make a career out of it.
Exactly. That's right. I love that. And changing that mindset, you then, it's such a huge thing because you really then start to change the way you look at yourself, the way you look at nutrition, the way you look at even your recovery, the sleep that you're getting. That's, yeah, game changer. I love that. So let's dive deeper into the fueling now. Pre-exercise, you mentioned it before, and I'd have to say I'm someone who wants to train in the morning. I'm not a morning person, so I'm basically waking up like 30 to 45 minutes before I train, waking up, get ready. Sometimes I have something and sometimes I don't. I'll be honest. Even after my chat with Dr. Stacey Sims, she's like, eat something before. And still, I still need to work on that. So can you help the folk like me who are getting up just to walk out of bed and go to training, and what we can do around our nutrition to improve the outcomes of our training?
Well, the first thing you're doing is just sometimes having it. So that behavior is there sometimes. So I think for those people who are the sometimes feel, sometimes don't, like kind of have a bit of an honest like discussion with yourself and like, what is that block? The other thing, I love the idea of habit hacking and habit stacking. And so if is there something that you are doing? Like, are you having a cafe? Are you having coffee before you go every morning? Like for some people, they will always do that. And can we find a way to just pair that with it? But for me, I always love to come back to like, how are we performing when we are fueling? So if we're not just doing it because like we know we should, if you're someone who's like tracking your training or using your Stravas or looking at data or any type, like is there a way you can connect your performance with that? I know for myself, even if I go to like a 45-minute circuit class or a 60-minute PT, I know if I have something before I go, I feel so good that whole session. Whereas if not, I dip at the back end. And look, when it comes to women and depending on age and hormonally, which Stacey would have covered off in, as the queen of that space, but there's that side of things, but there's then also just the performance. So something is better than nothing. And, you know, in the ideals, depending on the types of training you do, there are some recommendations. So I generally try and get my clients having 0.5 to 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So often I might say, let's start with 30 grams as a kind of as a starting point. But even if that's overwhelming, like start with something, even a mouthful. Like obviously we don't want to waste food, but one dried apricot is a behavior that you're starting. A sip of 100% juice or coconut water. I don't know, like just something which is providing you with some fuel. Even if it's not food, it could be a liquid. It could be a really nice place to start.
Cool. That is really helpful. I think it is, you're right. And it is the habit. And I think getting into the habit of just that one small thing, really does make a difference. And I do notice a difference certainly when when I have food. So I'm not sure what that block is. It's certainly something I need to work on.
Can you put it out the night before? Like what do you gravitate towards? Is there like, do you set your clothes out? Is it setting the clothes and putting a banana on top? Or
that's a point. Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's like that, because I'll always have the clothes ready to go. But the problem is I don't feel like eating anything. I just don't want to have it. And the thought of it makes me kind of gag. So I think for me, might sound really dumb and basic, but I think it's the way to start that habit. I like the idea of a banana, but even that doesn't sound great for me. So I think even just cutting like a quarter banana, not half,
Totally.
must be a
Quarter.
quarter, just put that there. I think I could stomach that. So yeah, it's certainly making it as easy as possible and digestible.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a date or a dried apricot or a dried
A date,
apple or,
yeah.
just in a little container, a cute container, like on top of your.
Oh, that's an idea. I like that. Yeah, because it's the same container. Every time you put, yeah, okay. These
Got
are
to
good
ritualize
strategies.
it.
Yes, absolutely.
And look,
Can we talk?
I get it because I was a swimmer growing up. So I get the early morning trainings and I get the like, you're not waking up at 4 a.m. going, oh, I just so feel like something. It's that behavior
Exactly.
of like, just, I know I got to do it. How am I going to do it? How do I hack myself to do it and then build?
What was your go-to?
Well, I actually I was pretty young. Like this was like at
Yeah.
school kind of age. So there was a bit of like, and my parents were driving me. So there was a bit of, I'm not going to say force feeding, but they were like also there. They were there to like help
With
enforce the
love.
behavior. But for me, it was, I think the banana was there a little bit, but also like a drink. So I don't think they're still out, but sustagen. So it was kind of like the sports up and go at the time, which was,
Yeah.
so a liquid option was good for me. But also I do appreciate when I work with runners or triathletes who are running, like it's the running part is a lot more challenging than when they're on the bike or swimming, just from that like stress on the gastrointestinal tract. So that is a factor to consider. But start with a date, start with an apricot, whatever.
Yeah. Done. Let's go there, the runner, because that's something that I commonly hear with clients who, throughout the training kind of manage it okay. And then when it comes to race day, they find themselves either throwing up or running to the bathroom. Is that strictly the nutrition side of things? Like what's happening there and how can we avoid that?
Maybe not exclusively, but likely a large contributing factor. So my question to those people is, are you practicing your race nutrition in training to the T? Or are you introducing new things or increased volume? Because if you haven't practiced it in a training simulation regularly and you're trying something essentially new, like not brand new, you're probably using products that you use. But one thing I commonly see runners do, not, I don't want to generalize, but just some of the ones I've worked with, thinking around that kind of marathon distance, they might do their like up to 30, 36K type thing, and they're having one gel that whole time. Whereas then in a race, they try to have 3 or 4. That is a lot of extra carbohydrates at a really high concentration entering your gut when you're at a tempo that is at your probably like max, and then adding in like arousal, competition, new environments, all of these like hormonal kind of priming things our body does. So there's a lot of additional factors going on there, plus potentially not new, but different. So my thing is you need to practice exactly what you do. I'm not saying every single training session, but you should have like rehearsed and be very comfortable and very familiar with it. And your body and your gut, most importantly, needs to be very comfortable and familiar with it. Look, there can be, if you're underfueling or overfueling, like stress on the body, heat stress, depending on the climate. Like there are a lot of other factors, but if there's like running to the toilet and vomiting, like the nutrition has played a part 100%.
Mm. Can we talk more about the fueling strategies for the different type of athlete? Because I assume it's always going to be different depending on the training that you're doing, whether it is more of that endurance runner or if it's the strength based athlete in the gym, crossfitting or whatever it is. Should there be like a foundation of this is what you should be getting always, and then just building on depending on what you're doing, like whether it's the endurance or the explosive athlete?
Yeah, it's you'd be surprised. It's probably less different than what people think it is. And there's also then like what the research or what the evidence says and then what someone can actually tolerate. So For example, this, like the primer, the pre-performance snack, that whole concept I've kind of discussed. I guess at a broader sense, I talk about something called the fueling framework, which is like the 4 hours out from a session, looking at the meal, the snack, and the primer. Obviously, again, for our morning trainers, like it's not so much the 4 hours, it's like the night before. So the dinner, the supper, and the morning. But look, it's also, I see more of the difference what people are doing in the session as well, because there is a limiting factor to what you can ingest before you train. And, again, that's something is better than nothing. When I'm working with an endurance athlete, depending on the session, depending on the time of the session, all these variables are really loose and it's quite a big range. I'm looking at 1 to 4 grams per kilogram pre-session, but if that's an early morning run, it's certainly at the end of the one. Whereas if it's like a Saturday morning, a little bit later with a group and there's a bit more time. So that's why that's such a wide range. But most importantly, also what you're doing during, like the intra-fueling piece, and particularly endurance-based sports. I see people utilizing nutrition when they start to fatigue, and the strategy is not use it when you feel fatigue. The strategy is use it from the get-go, like 15, 20 minutes, half an hour in max, and minimize or delay the fatigue. That's the strategy. With your CrossFit or like your team sport athletes, still, like depending on the session, strength or conditioning and all of that, thinking about that pre-performance primer in particular. And when I said the 1 to 4 grams, I didn't mean in the primer. I kind of meant maybe in the snack and the primer, or the meal and like across maybe 2 or 3 options. But with a team sport or a CrossFit kind of style athlete, it's looking at around that 0.5 gram to 1 gram in the before. But also if their sessions are dipping over 90 minutes, 100% ingesting something during. Yeah, or if it's a double day, 260 minutes, which are pretty high intensity. Like, yes, you could get through without eating something, but if you want to push your performance and improve it, there's benefit to ingesting carbohydrates during. And for those style of athletes, it's that 30 to 60 grams an hour. With an endurance-based athlete, when we're pushing over like 2.5, 3 hours for an event or a session, the textbook or the theory will say 60 to 90. But again, if I'm working with a runner exclusively, they're really probably, unless it's like a trail runner or ultra endurance, and like the pace is a lot different. If we're talking even halves or marathons, it's never at that level. It's probably in the realm of like 30 to 45 grams an hour. But technically, in theory, from what we can oxidize, which means the amount of carbohydrate we can use, it can get up to 90 or a little bit more. Some of the research is showing people tolerating like 120 grams, which is pretty wild. That's quite a lot of carbohydrate to have per hour. Yeah,
wow.
a lot of gut training. Those people are doing a lot of gut training.
yeah. Don't go doing that right off the bat.
No, definitely do not.
So let's then talk post event or activity. What are the key things that we need to be doing to optimize recovery and I guess also muscle adaptation?
Yeah, totally. It's again, from a principle point of view, recovery is pretty universal across the board. Like, there's acute recovery, like as in what you do straight after training. The rule is the sooner the better, like no doubt. But if you're training twice a day, or depending on like, when you're training and what you've got next, that timing does become a little bit more critical. So, if it's night and then morning the next day, or morning and then the afternoon, for the people who might train kind of close or twice a day, within 30 minutes is key. A minimum of like the things we want are protein, carbs, fluids, and electrolytes. They're the big ones from an acute, like as in what the body needs straight away. Protein from a muscle recovery, carbohydrates from a glycogen replenishment, hydration from a replacing what we've like sweat and rehydrating, and electrolytes also from that rehydration point of view. But yeah, 20 to 40 grams of protein comes in again. So that amount stays similar to what we need across the day. If it's been a more intense session, I'd be aiming for the upper end of that. And then carbohydrates, like 0. Depending on the person, if you can get 1 gram per kilogram, that's that's ideal. So, if you're, 60 kilos, we're aiming around 60 grams of carbohydrate. So that might be a smoothie with some oats and some fruit, and from whatever, like if you're using soy milk or almond milk or cow's milk, there would be an element of carbohydrates in there. But I personally think more importantly, it's about our chronic recovery. So it's about if you train every single day, every single meal or snack is an opportunity for you to recover, because we know that process of recovery, muscle protein synthesis, which is like the muscle recovering or getting stronger, adapting basically, is 24 to 48 hours after a session. So for someone who's training every single day, you are always in a state of recovery. So yes, getting something in straight away is really important to start that process. It's also going to help with your second session or your session the next morning. But in terms of maximizing your adaptation, maximizing your recovery, we come back to those pulses and why they're so important. Because that, if you're hitting that like maximum, or not even maximum, but ideal amount, you are optimally switching on that pathway. Whereas like if you're just getting half of it, you're still getting some benefit, but you're just not optimizing it. So chronic recovery is a really big thing.
With optimizing it, what are we missing out on if we're not doing I know you just spoke about the chronic side of recovery, but that acute phase, if we're completely missing that because we're driving home from training, getting to work, there's obviously a process to do that, and then we tell ourselves, well, I'll have a bigger meal afterwards or at lunch or wherever. What are we missing in that phase that's necessary?
Yeah, it's more about the adaptation to the session. So it's not that it's not happening, but you're not getting the maximal adaptation that you could be if you paired the two together. And I guess the examples, I gave with that is like if you're training twice a day or night into the morning. If you train like once a day in the morning and that's your thing, that timing is a little bit more flex. Like it's more within that 60 minutes is ideal, even up to 90. And I guess the term, the window of adaptation, like that gets talked about a lot. And it's not as set in stone as what it used to be. Like it's not like 60 minutes is up and bang, you're getting no adaptation.
Over. Sorry, you missed the window. Yeah, we're closed.
Sorry. The train's left the station. You've missed it. Like we're not, so people get so bogged down in that. And I think there's always ideals, but then it's also like, well, what are all your other behaviors across the day? So I guess to simplify, you're just not maximizing the adaptation to the session if you had something closer. But if everything else is pretty good, like there's also that opportunity as well.
I want to talk about the athletes who are not only athletes, but, the corporates who are working crazy hours. We'll take it to the athletes first, especially one that comes to mind. Just recently, there was the Ultraman. It's a 3-day event. You've got a 10K swim followed by something like 140 something K bike ride. Day 2 is a 240 something K bike ride, followed by day 3, which is a double marathon. So these events, how do we fuel ourselves if we're, we've got hours and hours, like 7 to 8 hours of activity, followed by a very small window of recovery, and then hopefully we get some good sleep, and then backing it up day after day. Like, how do we make sure that we're fueling for that?
The human body's pretty amazing, isn't it? Like some of the things people can train for, but 100% those people would be working with like a sports dietitian, or they've done some really good research. But coming back to like the preparation before, so the 1 or 2 days before, there would have been some preparation, some increased carbs. Carb loading gets thrown around like, yes, in theory, that's like 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of body mass. In the practical, I haven't seen a lot of people be able to do that. So it's kind of, maximizing out what you can, they would have trialed and tested this 100% in as many of their simulated training sessions. But the prep is important. The during is important. Like that notion of I'm not starting when I'm fatigued. I'm starting from the get-go to provide and optimize. But also coming back to that sleep, the sleep hygiene and the 3 hours and all of that. Maybe this is an extreme example, but even if you're someone just working late, training late, or you're a team sport athlete and you have a late game through the week, that kind of thing, refueling is priority over that, like, don't eat before bed, because if you don't refuel or fuel, that may impact your sleep, which will impact your recovery. And also you're going to feel pretty average the next day. So, yeah, look, I guess my thing with the people doing something like that is they'd be prepping like a day or two before. They'd have a really targeted strategy. They would be hydrating and replenishing carbohydrates and probably a bit of fats throughout. They would have trained their gut incredibly to be able to tolerate what they needed to, and they would be tight on that recovery. So, yeah. Humans are pretty incredible.
Craziness. And what about the average person who, average active person who is working late at night because they've got deadlines to meet and they've got 1 a.m. finishes, 2 a.m. finishes, and then up again at 5 and 6? How can we utilize our nutrition to, I guess, give us the energy to back it all up?
Yeah, it's the relationship with sleep and nutrition on the flip side, like when we're not, I think, and I'm not saying this for people to get kind of bogged down on like, oh, this is happening to me and I don't have a strategy. I'm mentioning it and then I'm going to give you some strategies to kind of like cope through those periods, which just sometimes happen.
Yeah.
But when we're getting poor quality sleep for more than a few nights, some of our hormones start to like be imbalanced, and that includes leptin and ghrelin, which is our appetite and hunger hormones. So we start to promote more of our hunger hormones. So this is also why we do start to get hungrier when we're not sleeping properly. So first of all, we need to like understand that. And if this is like a week or a few weeks, sometimes we just need to make peace with that. This is what we're doing, and we need to give our body the nutrition that it needs. What I do see people doing is, though, they're tired, so they're unorganized, they haven't done the prep, or they haven't thought ahead and ordered a meal delivery service. So they're not only hungrier, but they're making those poor food choices. So that cycle kind of goes on. So my thing there is acknowledge the need for regular meals and snacks, like what we've talked about. The protein, again, comes back because it's going to satisfy you. But nutrition is also like, yes, in an event, it's an opportunity to delay fatigue, but that's the same for humans every single day at work. So if we're regularly giving ourselves nutrition every 3 to 4 hours, some protein, some whole grains, some colors, some healthy fats, we're giving us the nutrients that satisfy us, protein, fuel us, carbs, like vitalize us and like fill us up with our veggies, and then the healthy fats, which are like anti-inflammatory but also satisfy us. So if we've just got these regular drip feeding meals and snacks across the day every couple of hours, that's going to make that process so much like easier to get through, but from a like an appetite and a focus and an energy point of view as well. And so then when we are getting to sleep, we're probably needing to wind down and have a bit of a like sleep routine because we can be quite wired, but it's also very supportive of that.
Yeah, amazing. And it takes the guessing out of it all. Knowing that that's what we need to get, certainly makes it easier to set ourselves up for success and getting it done.
Totally. And also give yourself permission. Like if you're there trying to do it all yourself, there's so many good opportunities out there to either like order online or get easy ready-made meals or partially ready-made meals. Like these are all strategies which you should have, and you can just look ahead and go, wow, the next 3 to 4 weeks it's busy. I better dial up the Marley Spoon, or I better dial up the Dynamic or the Heartly Health or whatever it is, wherever you live, whatever you like to use. That's one less thing to think about, and it's just showing up and it's there. So the pre-sliced salads or the barbecue chooks or the like tofu, just so quick and easy to cook. But that's where we just go, we don't have to like do it all. What can we kind of outsource, or how can we make it easier to do the things that we need to do?
Absolutely. Huge lesson. I would love to get into some a bit of the diet culture hacks before we wrap this up, because I feel like there are so many different things out there and they come and go depending on whatever the fad is. And, you know, they're always being promoted as the ultimate, you know, this is what you should be following for maximum, you know, recovery, energy, muscle, whatever it is, whether it's the keto, the paleo, the, you know, low carb, high fat, all these different diets out there. I'm sure there's more. You know, what's this doing to, I guess, our mindset, you know, the theory around nutrition and you know, food intake. And then I guess, you know, the subconscious stuff that's happening behind the scenes, like our relationship with food as well. What are your thoughts around, I guess, the whole diet culture and what's out there?
Yeah, I think, you know, we live in such an interesting time, like where there are, the thing I like, there are people out there a lot more vocal in a positive way, like addressing this. So someone like the new nutritionist, like Lindy Cohen, I think she does such a great job at all of this. But my take on it is, and as I said before, I don't subscribe to any way of eating. Like, I subscribe to the science and principles. And when I hear people talking about what they're trying or what they're doing, like, first of all, I won't always engage because I'm like, oh, that's a minefield. And when people find out I'm a dietitian, oh goodness. But when I'm working with people or if I'm having conversations, I just try to listen and understand. And like, when you actually probe them on, okay, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? The other thing I'll say is people's often like interpretation of what these things are versus what they're doing are often two different things. But I just listen to them and try to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And then, you know, where you hear and see the opening, again, it's about education and awareness. So people don't often think of the flip side. And people are doing these things more in my world, the athletic world or the performance world, for a performance benefit. And, you know, when you ask them questions, and one thing, like, I know we're going to chat about is my 3 things I get like my clients to dial into. When you get them to dial into those 3 things, which I won't ruin the ending right now by saying them, but there's often something missing there. So there's that education and awareness piece, but even just an understanding of like nutritional requirements and like following something long term. And I guess the biggest thing, like the biggest win and the biggest indicator you're on the right track, is something that is sustainable, that you can follow and you can rinse and repeat. So I do think maybe it's because I'm getting older, as in like I'm in my mid 30s now. Like, you know, I know I'm not old, but like I'm getting older. I do feel like I'm hearing and seeing people kind of cluing on to fads, and they are a little bit more kind of aware of like gut health and the microbiome. I think that's done wonders in terms of people's awareness of longevity. But look, there's definitely a lot of people out there trying a lot of different things, like athletes, gem pop and the rest, but like understanding the why and giving the education. And if I'm working with someone, it's just like never like putting them down or anything like that, but just understanding, giving some recommendations. Often people are pretty happy to flex on a couple of things. So it might be like, oh, okay, if we're trying this, but like, what if like we added X, Y, and Z? And then that's a very strategic, science evidence-based strategy I'm often layering in that I know they're going to feel better doing. And then when they come back and we go, oh, well, how was, you know, X, Y, and Z? And they're like, oh, so much better. So
You're like, funny that.
Oh, really? Great.
Yeah. And
so I don't know if that answers it, but it's a minefield and people need to approach with caution. There's no magic bullets. And if we're saying like we're not eating all these things, like, do you really want to do that? Like, is that, unless we're talking ultra processed foods, fair enough.
Exactly, yeah.
But everything, like if we're talking fruits, vegetables, whole grains, you know, meat, if you eat like that, like we all just a bit of everything is all good, people.
Yeah, and that's what I've really loved about you and your work. It's not restrictive. It's really, really practical tools, and simple to do. And I mean, I highly recommend if listeners aren't following following you, then they absolutely should, because you offer so much free information that's really, like I said, practical and super valuable for any type of athlete. Amazing. Jess, if people want to work with you, how can they do that?
So probably the best place to start is to go to my website, jessicaspendlove.com. All the goodness is there. So you'll find information about my coaching program. So that is my 3-month in-depth coaching program where we go deep on your goals, nutrition. We end up talking about things other than nutrition. As we mentioned, it's all intersected, and I'm a big sleep gal, supplements, all the rest, depending on the person and what they need. I do a lot of speaking. So for corporates, whether it's like teams or leadership teams or offsites or conferences, that type of thing, schools as well. I enjoy presenting to schools. And then I've got an online program, Eat Like the Elite, which is kind of where I've put everything that I've spoken about here today, the principles, all the things I learned working with all the professional athletes into an online course. So, but yeah, my website, and then best places for the content I push out would be Instagram, LinkedIn, or I also have like an exclusive weekly email with content I don't share anywhere else. So you can join up to that. I'm sure we'll pop it in the show notes, but if you go to my website, there'll be a pop-up and you can subscribe there.
Amazing. We will definitely have all of that in the show notes. I'd love to finish off now with one last question for you, Jess. What is the key to adopting a nutrition plan or habits that are healthy and sustainable?
For me, there's 3 big points there. So it needs to be nutritious, it needs to be delicious, and it needs to be easy. And they're all equally important. It needs to provide you with what you need. You need to enjoy it, so you want to do it. We're not in a prison. No one's suffering here. This is about enjoyment. We have to do it every day, multiple times a day. And then for it to be sustainable and for it to be a habit, we want it to be easy. So it's whatever's going to work for you. I've got people who are my meal preppers and they love to do that every week. And then I've got my really busy corporates who pay for convenience. And for me, I'm like, whatever works for you, your personal situation, and whatever you can rinse and repeat. And also, it's about having those different strategies that you can call on for when you need them. So I think you need to just be honest with yourself and say, do I find this easy? Do I enjoy it? And can I continue to do it? And, check in on yourself on a few things, which I think we'll be chatting about next.
We will. And just before we get there, I just have to say, you speak my language: delicious, nutritious, and easy. I mean, that for me is like sold.
The trifecta.
Give me all the gold then. That's it. Exactly. So this last part here, I love the guest to give a question to the listener now. So what's your one question that you would love this incredible listener to ask of themselves right now?
So I'm not sure it's a question, but it's something for them to definitely observe amongst themselves. For me, I have 3 metrics I get all of my clients to check in on when we start to implement things. 1 is their energy levels, and that's energy across the day, but also consistency. 2 is their appetite and how that's going across the day. And I guess cravings sit in there as well. And 3 is their performance. And if, they are someone that trains, that can speak to that type of performance, but it's also just performance in their overall life. And so check in with yourself, apply some of the strategies we've discussed, and sit down and just observe, how do they feel? Do I have elevated energy, or do I crash less in the afternoon? Is my appetite more controlled and I get less of those cravings at night? And am I feeling amazing in my training or just across my day? These are what I call subjective measures, and this is the stuff that actually matters. It's quality of life, and whatever objective goal you've got for yourself, whatever event or strength or target or whatever you set for yourself, that's probably something which is going to take time and strategy and consistency. So if you're checking in on appetite, energy, and performance, and they're all green flags, that's a really good sign you're in the rhythm of something that's really supporting you to get to where you're going. and most importantly, in a sustainable way.
Yes, I love it. Amazing. Jess, this has been incredible. I've loved this conversation, and I'm certainly going to put out my quarter banana right now as we get off this chat. So once again, thank you for joining me on this podcast.
You're so welcome. And yeah, I think we hopefully have started a movement there. If anyone's also going to start doing that, please tag me, Jess_Spendlove Dietitian. I want to see the half, quarter, or whatever it is, bananas with the exercise gear night before, ready to rock and roll.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.
That was Jess Spendlove. Make sure you head over to the show notes because we've got all her details in there for you to get in touch if you need to, and also some really great resources for you in regards to what we spoke about today. So there's some really great resources. You can download them and apply them to your training and start performing at your very best. Because like Jess said, if you think you're performing at your best now, she can guarantee there's a little bit more in there for you, and we want to make sure that you are getting the absolute best from yourself. If you loved this episode and have fellow training friends that you train with, then make sure you share this episode with them. Leave a review and of course subscribe to the channel because it all helps this little podcast keep going strong. Once again, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you. Have the best day. Stay awesome, and I'll catch you next time.